Hi, I'm Cindy Winget, the author of The Apparition, and welcome to my channel. So in today's video, we're going to be doing my January wrap-up. So in the month of January, I like to read exclusively snowy books, if at all possible. Ones that are set in winter or are really cold and snowy and dreary and all of that. So these are in no particular order. I'm just going to start grabbing them from the stack and we'll go from there. So starting with Our Winter Monster, I read 50 pages of this and then I decided to stop. Not because I'm DNFing it, but because this talked about Christmas a few times, and so I think I'm going to wait and actually save this for December instead. So that's the only reason why I stopped. And I read Someone at the Door. This is a YA book that's a vintage book from like the 80s or 90s, and I can't really say that I enjoyed this one, unfortunately. Like, I understand it's not meant for adults, I understand that it's old, but at the same time I have read vintage YA books that are actually good, or at least better than this. So this one I found really repetitive, and the main character drove me nuts. She was so frustrating with the decisions that she would make or the things that she would say, and she was just very annoying and just angry at everything all the time. There was this boy in particular, if he said something that she didn't like, she would like physically try to hit him, or like she'd push him into the couch or something, which I just don't love that. And I don't know, there was just some things that came out of left field that I'm just like, really? And it's kind of one of those moments where it's like you think it's somebody the whole time, and then when you find out it actually is, then you're surprised and you're like, but you thought it was him the whole time. Even though in this case it is like a switcheroo, you know, they make you think that it's a certain someone, but it's not. But either way, it's that same trope where they're like distrusting them the entire time, but then when it actually is them, it's like, oh, but you were such a good person. And it's like, really? But this whole time you thought it was him. So I don't know. I just don't really like that either. And I didn't really like the twist and who the killer ended up being. I just kind of was like, eh. So I don't know. I just didn't really enjoy this one all that much. It does have a lot of snowy vibes. It does have the winteriness. And, you know, judging by the cover, I have read an R.L. Stine book that also has a similar thing happening, and so even that wasn't new or interesting, so I'd probably only give this one 2 stars. And then I read a couple of horror novellas on my Kindle. The first one's called Knock Knock, and this one was a ghost story, but I don't know, it just didn't have that same gothic, gloomy vibe that I was hoping for. And really, there was only one tiny piece that was snowy for like a chapter, so it didn't have the snowy, wintry vibes that I was looking for, unfortunately. And I just thought the twists in it were again just okay. So this was a fine read, but it wasn't anything to write home about. It wasn't anything special. Probably just give it middle of the road 2.5. And then I also read Come Forth and Thaw, and this one had a decent twist to it, but there's one aspect of it that just didn't make sense. And so I prefer twists where you can look back and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But you know, when it doesn't, there's a certain thing that seemed like a plot hole to me, like a convenient way to pull the wool over your reader's eyes. And yeah, you could say maybe she was a little bit crazy, or blame it on fever dream type stuff, but the way it was done just wasn't believable, because even if you did use that, there are ways to make it believable or make it ring true when the twist happens, and this one just didn't. It just felt like a lie. I hope this makes sense. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I just don't want to spoil anything. I didn't love that, and I guess this wasn't really a winter read. I thought it was, but it's actually set in October, so it was cold, but there was no snow and it wasn't winter time. But I didn't know that going into it, and it did have some really great imagery at times that were pretty excellent, and so I enjoyed that. So I would maybe give this one 3 stars, because it was a fun time, but it wasn't something that knocked my socks off. It wasn't something I would consider wildly recommending or rereading at any point, so I think a 3 star is probably good for this one. I just realized that I haven't been telling you what these books are even about. So Someone at the Door is about this teenage girl and her sister that got snowed in at home, and their parents are on vacation, but they get snowed in at the airport and can't make it home. And then these 2 boys show up at their house claiming that they had been in a car accident and that they need to have a place to stay or they'll freeze to death. Plus one of them's bleeding from his leg. But there's also been on the news some things about an escaped killer, and so our main character is kind of leery about these 2 boys that are now spending the night at her house. And then Knock Knock, like I said, is a ghost story, and a lot of it is just the lady's backstory and about her family and stuff. And so that was kind of boring in a way, you know. But that's essentially all it really was this old woman that stays at this house and she reminisces about her husband and her kids and her family. But, you know, she's also lives in a house that's haunted, and there's really not much else to say as far as the synopsis goes. And then Come Forth and Thaw is about the suicide forest in Japan, but in this one it's a made-up forest and it's set in America, but it's the same concept where you had this forest where people just seemingly like to go in order to end their lives. And so we have our main character who believes that her teenage son is about to commit suicide, and she runs off to this forest to try to stop him. And then I read a couple of Freida McFadden books, starting with Never Lie. So this is about this couple who are trying to buy a house, and they're supposed to meet their realtor at this house, but it becomes a blizzard outside, and so they actually get trapped in this house, and the realtor never shows up. Probably she can't get there due to the storm, and so they end up taking up shelter in this house that they were going to look at in order to purchase. And while they're there, they discover that this is actually the house of this famous psychologist that had been missing and supposedly murdered. And so they feel like that's intriguing, and they kind of want to see if they can find clues and see what happened to this psychologist, or psychiatrist, I mean. And different things go down. I actually really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a fun time, and I thought that twist was going to be super obvious. I was like, oh yeah, I know what the twist is. Like, it's so obvious what's going on. But I was wrong, so that was pleasantly surprising. And so it was not what I thought it was. And the ending I'm a little bit conflicted on, because I liked a certain character and I didn't like the way things ended. I wanted it to be happier. But you know, this is a thriller. They don't always end happy. But for the most part, I did enjoy this one, and I thought it was a fun, easy read. So if you're looking just for like a popcorn thriller, this would be a good one to pick up in winter time. And I would give this 4 stars. And then the other one that I read from Freida McFadden is The Crash. And I actually haven't heard very many good things about this book. A lot of people seem to not be liking it, but it definitely has those snowy vibes. And so I just wanted to pick it up, especially since I already owned it. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a chance. You know, this seems like a good time to read it. And I actually loved this. This was a 5-star read for me. I thought it was really easy and fast-paced. I do admit that maybe it was a little too long. It didn't need to necessarily be as long as it was, but I enjoyed this. I thought it was really fun. And there was a point towards the beginning where it was starting to lose me just a little bit, and I was like, okay, there's not going to be that much to talk about with what's going on. And so I was kind of like, oh, is this going to get really boring in the middle? But luckily, just as I started to lag, we went to a different point of view. So that helped pick up things again. And it was really interesting to have both points of views, both from this woman who is pregnant and got in a car accident and is taken to this home by this man that's pretty scary, and she doesn't really want to go, but she's hurt and there's a blizzard and she needs to go somewhere. And then she starts to realize that maybe the people that took her in are not going to take her to the hospital like she hopes, you know, and they keep claiming it due to the storm, but she's kind of not believing them. And then you get the POV from one of the people that are maybe or maybe not holding her hostage. And so I thought it was really interesting to get both POVs, because it showed how different things can look. So like one person can interpret a chain of events one way, and then another person, even though they went through the same events, they look at things differently, you know? And there's a lot of assuming. So like one person assumes things about the other that's not necessarily true. And it was just really fascinating to me to get both of their points of views. And so I thought that was a smart choice. And this one ended how I wanted it to end. And so I was glad that it wrapped up the way that it did. So yeah, this was a 5-star read for me. I don't know why people are not liking this one. I thought it was really good and easy and fun, and I thought it was a good thriller. And then I picked up Once Upon a Rose. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I actually ended up DNFing this at page like 97. I couldn't stand the writing, and the plot was like overly simplistic and predictable, and like there wasn't enough, I want to say angst, but that's not the right word. There wasn't enough like conflict, and I could tell that the one and only conflict that's in here was going to be wrapped up super easy and really simply. And I was right, because I did go ahead and read the ending and kind of skim, and so everything was just wrapped up too conveniently and too easily. And for being a Beauty and the Beast retelling, you know, you kind of expect the Beast to be a little bit grumpy, you know, but he wasn't grumpy at all. and he wasn't even under a curse. It was just, well, he just had like a magical problem, but I don't know. It just wasn't what I wanted it to be. It just, yeah. So even though it's like super, super short, I think it's only like 220 pages or something. I got about halfway. It was just like, nah, this just really isn't for me. It just isn't my type of fairy tale retelling. And then for my book club that I'm a part of, they chose Seeking Persephone. And this is actually a reread for me. So I already owned this book and I already read it like 15 years ago. But it was fun to do a reread and remember why I liked this book so much. So this one is sort of like Beauty and the Beast, but it's actually a retelling of Persephone and Hades. But it kind of has that same type of feel to it as like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. But we have this woman who comes from a poor family and she's the oldest, and she gets this opportunity to have an arranged marriage with this duke that's going to elevate her family both socially and give them money. So she jumps at this chance to help her family because after the death of her mother, she's kind of taken on that role of being a mother to all of her siblings. And so she marries this duke, but the duke won't even look at her. And she starts to realize it's because he has these scars all over the side of his face and he doesn't like to show his scars. But she's hoping, that this arranged marriage could turn into love. She's heard of other marriages where you grow to love each other. But, he's definitely gruff and grumpy and people are afraid of him. And so she's not really sure she can soften his heart, but she wants to try to at least be friends, Yeah, so this was really interesting because it is a Persephone and Hades retelling, but during like Regency times. It could be Victorian, but I think it's Regency. But either way, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really, really good, and it was fun to revisit an old book that I liked and to realize that I still like it. And then I read Coram House. This one is classified as a thriller, but it has more of a feel of like a murder mystery or even a little bit of a police procedural. Even though she's not a detective or a cop in any way, it just has that feel to it, where she's trying to piece together a murder and trying to find clues and talking to people, so it just kind of has that same feel to it. So this one is a little bit slower paced, but I thought it was a decent thriller though. I really did like it. And we have this main character who is going to Coram House, and this is an old orphanage where this little boy was drowned. And so she's trying to figure out what happened to this little boy because she wants to, I believe she's like a journalist or something, or she was writing a book on it. I can't quite remember, but I think it was something like that. But as she's there doing research for her book about Coram House, murder happens in modern times, and she thinks it's somehow linked to Coram House, and she kind of is afraid that her presence in this town is stirring things up. Yeah, I thought this was a decent read. I would give this 4 stars. And then we have Where He Left Me, and this is about this woman who has just moved to this little house in the middle of a mountaintop because it was her husband's family home that he grew up in. And then he had to leave to go to a work conference, and a blizzard happens and she gets trapped on this mountain in this house without her husband because he can't get back to her. And then just like in Someone at the Door, while she's trapped at this house, she has a couple of unexpected visitors that need a place to go or else they'll freeze to death, but she doesn't really trust them. She doesn't know why they're on their mountain because nobody else lives there. It's just them. And so she's like, how and why are they even here? So this one was really, really good. I really enjoyed this one. This is an excellent thriller. It definitely had very, very, very cold, snowy, wintry vibes, and it was very intriguing and engaging and kept my attention the entire time. So I would give this 5 stars. And then I read Any Trope But You, and I haven't read very many romances that take place in winter, so I was glad to find one that takes place in Alaska. So this is about this woman who is an author, and she writes romances, but because she kind of had a bit of a rough patch in her own love life, and the man that she was supposed to marry ends up obviously not marrying her, and she gets her heart broken, and she's pretty sad and bitter about love, but she writes these romance novels, and she doesn't believe in happily ever after though. And so she kind of has this file on her computer that she calls the happily never after, and she writes an alternative ending to all of her novels where they end in divorce or abuse, or the guy gets fat and is a drunk, or just doesn't end in a happy way. And it's just kind of cathartic for her just to write down these negative happily never afters, but she doesn't intend for anybody to ever read them but her. But she's on a Zoom call with this podcaster, I believe it is, and they're talking about her book, and all of her followers are watching this call. And unfortunately, somehow this document gets leaked during this live show, and all of her followers see that she has been writing these bad endings with these characters that these fans have fallen in love with, and they're very upset about it. And they want to cancel her, and her publisher ends up dropping her, and her agent's like, I can try and sell another book, but I don't know how it's going to go because nobody really wants you to write romance anymore because of this scandal that happened. So she's like, fine, well, maybe I need to change directions, change gears. And so she decides to write a murder mystery. And so she ends up going to Alaska because her sister, who wants her to have a chance to breathe and get away from all the negative press and be able to just, deal with her new book and not anything else. And because her book is going to be set in Alaska, her sister books her this trip to Alaska as like a research trip. And she ends up going to this lodge where she falls in love with the proprietor, or the proprietor's son, I should say. But she doesn't want to. She's trying desperately not to fall for him because she doesn't believe in love and she knows it's just going to end in heartache. But he embodies like all the romance tropes that she's ever written about. And so she's finding it difficult not to fall for him. So I did enjoy this one. I thought it was really good. I thought it was nuanced and had some depth to it. But the main character in the beginning did kind of drive me crazy. She was a little bit immature at times and kind of just like the ditzy character that I don't really love. But she did get better and she did become a little bit more serious as time went on, which I appreciated. And I really loved the male love interest. I thought he was really cute and I really liked his character a lot. But also, it kind of had like some crass moments, and I don't mean the sex scenes because there is a few sex scenes in this and they were actually pretty good, but I'm not really into smut or spicy stuff. I prefer it to be off page, but for the most part it was pretty good. But outside of that, I mean like different comments that they would say that are just like cringy, just like, ew, I don't want to hear that, I don't want to know that were of a sexual nature, so I didn't love that. And it does use the F word quite a bit, which again I just don't love. So it was a really good story, and I did like the love interest and I did like the love story, but I just didn't care for the main character in the beginning, and there was a lot of swearing, a lot of sexual talk. So I couldn't have that 5-star, but I would probably still give it 4 stars, maybe 3.5. But I thought it was a decent romance and I did enjoy my time with it. So that's it. That's all the books that I read in the month of January. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.